comment. You know, I'm fairly new to New Mexico. I've been here a little less than a year, and I met some unbelievable people. I was talking to a friend of mine this morning who said, "We're so glad you're back," because I was gone for 8 days in Utah visiting all my children and grandkids. And I need to tell you, when I'm there, there's a huge heart tug that that's where I should be, is closer to my kids and my grandkids. But as soon as I got on the plane, I felt like I was coming home. And as soon as I landed, I knew I was home. And that's how I feel about New Mexico. And there are some things in New Mexico that most of us are aware of and are not fond of. However, tonight is a great example of an organization, the Rio Grande Foundation, who has been able to create a climate that is comfortable enough that we have two opposing political candidates not only attending, but comfortable to speak to each other, to walk off to the side and have a conversation on their own, and to be here at this event. And Paul Gessing has done an amazing job with the Rio Grande Foundation. And I just think we need to give him a round of applause, because that's a unique situation. I would like to introduce to you someone that I just met in August. You might think that we've known each other for a long time, but in August, both Jamie Story and I were invited by Atlas Economic Research Foundation to attend a 2-week training in Virginia. It was a training that literally changed my life. Jamie's been in this movement a lot longer than I have, even though she's half my age. We met with 22 leaders from around the world, of think tanks from places like Mongolia, Turkey, Somalia, Brazil, Argentina. What am I missing? There were just Nepal. And we sat literally for 10 to 12 hours a day, and then we worked again at night with this group of people. It was a humbling experience to remember, or to be reminded, that the things that we're fighting for here today are things they can't even dream of. Right now, what they're fighting for are things like being able to walk down the street as a free person, for their women to be able to walk around without having to be fully covered, to have the choice of whether they're going to serve in a military or not, rather than, you know, being pulled off at a young age, to have the right to earn a living, to have the right to keep the money when they earn a living, to have the right to be a part of a think tank and not have your life truly be at risk. On Thanksgiving Day, Jamie and I, and anybody who's affiliated with Atlas, received an email from one of the leaders reminding us that 2 of the people that we know who have become literally friends of ours are in jail right now because they are standing up for freedom. And it really reminded me of the things that are important to us. So that's how Jamie and I met. And I'm going to read Jamie's bio, but I'm going to begin it by telling you that she is one of the most dynamic, charming, beautiful young ladies I've met. Why she's single, I don't know. So could you guys, you know. She asked me if there were going to be any 30-year-old men here. Jamie Story is president of the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii, a nonprofit free market think tank based in Honolulu. Since she became president, she oversaw the growth of the Institute from 2 to 5 full-time employees and from $250,000 to more than $500,000 in funds raised per year. Before moving to Hawaii, she was an education policy analyst at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. She previously served as an associate consultant in the Dallas office of Bain & Company, one of the top strategic management consulting firms in the world. Ms. Story also completed a year of service as Miss Texas 2004, during which she spoke to public school students, educators, government leaders, and civic organizations. She holds a BA in Mathematical Economic Analysis and Sport Management from Rice University in Houston. Jamie is, as I said, just one of those people that you cross paths with, and you're just glad that you met her. So it is my pleasure to introduce Jamie Story.
Thank you so much. We didn't just work at night, right? We had fun. We had a lot sometimes. It really is. You guys, by the way, feel free to fill in, because when I can move the mic back if you want to get closer or whatever, and I'll be playing the piano back there. It is, I can't tell you how much of an honor it is to do this. I've known Paul for years by working in this movement, and like Jean said, just met her a few months ago, but we have quickly become friends. I'm also a little bit nervous. I've spoken before as Miss Texas, and I've spoken as the president of the Grassroots Institute, I haven't really spoken as both. so I'm a little bit nervous. This is a really esteemed group of people to be speaking to today. The first time that I spoke as the president of the Grassroots Institute in Hawaii, I was also a little nervous. And it was the Rotary Club, the Honolulu Sunset Rotary Club and Waikiki Yacht Club is where they met. So I walked into the Waikiki Yacht Club, and I'd been to one of their meetings before, and there were only about 40 people there. And I walked in, and there's like 80 or 90 people. I'm like, wow, I'm thinking, big group came to see me, right? And then I find out half of them were actually there because they were visiting from a Rotary Club in Japan. So, which was fine, except they didn't actually understand anything I was saying. So when I got up there to speak, because they had a translator, I saw it, and I said, if you guys could just nod and smile, I would appreciate it. So I know I'm a little nervous now, and I know you guys have been drinking wine for the past hour and a half, so if you could also just nod and smile, that would make me feel better, okay? I'll start out by playing a couple classical pieces on the piano. The first one is what I played at Miss Texas and at the Miss America pageant. They only give us 2 minutes, so it's just a portion of the first movement of Mendelssohn's First Piano Concerto. And then I will play my favorite piece to play for you. It is Debussy's Arabesque No. 1. I'm going to bring my phone over. I might be talking. Got my notes here. I don't really have a podium. I'm here. I'm trying not to say too much. And so, like I mentioned, I've never before done an appearance as both Miss Texas and as a think tank president. And this is sorry. And so it was a little tough for me trying to figure out what to talk about because lately I've been giving the think tank stump speech. And I kind of explain why we defend the principles we're defending and talk all about public policy issues. But I would kind of be speaking to the choir here, or preaching to the choir here. And I know that I was advertised as being a Miss Texas, so you may want to hear just a little bit about that. And so Jean kind of led me in a really great direction. And she brought up a good point, that she and I, as members of think tanks, have the opportunity to travel around and network and go to these conferences and meet the great diversity of people that are found in this movement. But most of you don't have that same opportunity. And so I thought, and she thought maybe by you learning a little bit about my background and how I got into this field, that would kind of give you an idea of the types of people who are involved. So the most common question I get is, did you compete in pageants since you were a child? Well, no, actually I didn't, but I was around them since I was a child because my mom volunteered on the board of directors of our local preliminary pageant to the Miss Texas pageant. And so we had a piano at our house, and I remember about just a few months after I had started taking piano lessons when I was 5, the local pageant winner, who ended up going on to win Miss Texas, she was also a pianist. And so she came over to practice on our piano one day. And it was the first time that I had seen an excellent pianist up close. It was also the first beauty queen I had ever met. And then she went on, like I said, to win Miss Texas. And from that was kind of, she was who inspired me to compete. I don't think anybody who knew me then, though, and even on through junior high, would have ever guessed that I would become Miss Texas. I was definitely kind of a math nerd and had the glasses and everything. When I was Miss Texas, I spoke to hundreds of, well, tens of thousands anyway, probably hundreds of thousands of school students in Texas. And in every one of my presentations, I was speaking to them about how important it is to go to college and to make good grades and things. And I would show them my 4th grade picture. I had it huge, laminated. I would unroll it, and they would all die laughing. And I accidentally left it at home, the script. But just to kind of give you an idea of how I started, I hope I got out of that awkward phase by now. But even in high school, I was in the band, I was doing all the math contests and everything, and still playing the piano. But that's actually why I competed. And I got to Rice, and I was in college, and my student loans were piling up, and I was like, you know what, I need to earn some more scholarship money. And I was playing the piano, and I would have liked a place to perform in a venue, and so the pageants kind of provided that for me. So that's how I ended up competing, and I think I earned about $30,000 in scholarships competing in Miss Texas and Miss America. So another funny little story is that right after I won Miss Texas, I grew up near Fort Worth, and the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, Bud Kennedy, one of their reporters, he wrote this column about the new Miss Texas being a math nerd. And he called, he called my old professors, he called my old roommates, I mean everybody who knew that I was a nerd called them and got their quotes. It was so cute. And then I still remember the last line, maybe you guys will get a kick out of this. He said, "Look for her at Miss America. She'll be the one with the great figures." So I finished out that year. I had 400 appearances in total. Most of them were in Texas. Actually, one was in New Mexico. There was a camp full of Texas students. I think a church camp. They go from Texas and they come just over to Ruidosa, I think. And so I spoke to that group of Texas kids in New Mexico. And flew in a little puddle jumper over the mountains and everything. But then the other question that I often get from people is how did you go from Miss Texas to being interested in policy? And that's also a long story that I'll try to shorten here. But I got interested in education policy when I was at Rice. I was an economics major, and I also took a couple education classes. And I read some Milton Friedman, and at the time, I didn't know that things like paying teachers for performance and allowing parents to choose the best school for their children, I mean, those things were logical to me, But I didn't know that they all fit into this free market mindset. They just seemed like things that we should do, right? And so then I was Miss Texas, and I got to go speak at all these schools, and I got to see how one school with less money, somehow the kids do better than the big fancy school or whatever, and the money that was wasted, and the just varying qualities of teachers and principals and so forth. And so, so that's really how I got involved and wanted to do education policy. And the end of my Miss Texas year was wrapping up, and I was up at the Texas State Capitol, and I got to meet Governor Perry, and he asked me what I was going to be doing next. And I said, well, I could go back to my old consulting job, but I'd really like to work in education policy. And so he said, well, why don't you go apply to the Texas Public Policy Foundation? And so when the governor puts in a good word for you, you get hired, I found out. So I got hired by the Texas Public Policy Foundation to do education policy, and was there for 2.5 years. So Miss Texas year really contributed to that. But another thing that I learned being Miss Texas, had the privilege to do dozens of military appearances. And I went and saw the troops off as they were flying back to Iraq. I went to USO events, and I did several appearances at Walter Reed and Brooke Army Medical Center. And they were, I won't cry this time, but they were the most humbling experiences of my life. I mean, especially being from Texas, and so many of our members of the military being Texans as well. And met dozens of men and women who had had debilitating brain injuries or disfiguring injuries. And it just really instilled this more of an appreciation than I'd ever had before for the American principles of freedom and liberty. And I would never equate the work that Jean and Paul and I do with the very brave work of our American members of our military. But if you'll allow me, I will draw just a quick analogy. They are protecting our freedom and liberty, mostly from foreign threats. And we are protecting those same principles, mostly from domestic threats, otherwise called politicians. But that wasn't in my notes. Not all politicians, just most of them. But certainly the work of our founding fathers and the protection of our military over the years is what allows us to do our work and to try and protect those same principles that they're protecting for us. Anyhow, so I get to Hawaii, and oh, I didn't tell you how I got to Hawaii. I got offered this job in Hawaii from the job in Texas, and guess who one of the first people I met was, even when I was interviewing? I hadn't even moved. Harry Messenheimer. Do any of you know him? Yes. He was one of the original founders of the Rio Grande Foundation. And just a tremendous man, and he was actually kind of helping me, suggesting pieces I could play tonight and everything. But that's pretty neat. Now I have that connection to come back here today. Another kind of funny story. Right when I took the job in Hawaii, and I get there, and have any of you been to Hawaii? Just kind of show of hands. Okay. Are any of you familiar with the politics of Hawaii? It is diametrically opposed to Texas, for sure. And our legislature is 90% Democrats. We have a Republican governor for some reason, but 90% Democrats. And I get there, and they're not necessarily very welcoming to outsiders either. And so I get there, and I was doing my job. It was like a month after I arrived, and I saw this press release the mayor had put out promoting his heavy rail system. And it had all these lies in it and these inaccuracies. And so I just wrote this op-ed that corrected him. And they ended up just publishing a letter to the editor-sized version of it. But literally, that following Sunday, I wake up, my board member, one of my board members is calling me, "JP, you gotta look at the paper." The mayor had purchased nearly a full-size ad in both of our daily newspapers on a Sunday, and calling me a mainland conservative intruder and a Texas beauty queen who had just come here with suitcases full of Texas oil money to tell Hawaii what to do. So that was my first month in Hawaii.
Not a howley?
No. Oh yeah, I'm howling too. Actually, usually people who don't know who I am just assume I'm a tourist, so most of the time it's okay. But just just to kind of tie a little bit of policy into this, New Mexico and Hawaii are pretty similar, just from what I've learned even the past couple days. New Mexico is a little bit larger than Hawaii, but not much. I guess you have what percentage Democrat is the legislature here?
7. A lot.
70? I was going to guess 70 or so. And obviously Rio Grande Foundation and Breastfeed Institute are nonpartisan, but certainly that makes things difficult when you're as one-sided as you are in our states. And then we also just even, and we were actually started about the same time. We started in 2001 by a gentleman who ran it just like Harry did on a volunteer basis. And just like Paul, I'm now the first paid full-time ED to come in and run our think tank. So just to kind of cover a few of the issues that we work on. Education, I know, is a really big challenge here in New Mexico. You have a dropout rate, I believe, of about 50%. 50% of your 9th graders end up graduating 4 years later. In Hawaii, our dropout rate isn't quite that low. I think it's more around, our graduation rate is more around 65%. I don't know if it's because they have nowhere to go, we're on an island, I don't know. But our challenge is that we only have one school district in the entire state. So there is no school choice. You can't just move, you know, in Texas there's 1,000 school districts and you could move across the street and go to a better school if you wanted. You can't do that in Hawaii. You can't even move to another island to go to a better school, it's all the same. So that's a big challenge that we face. Harry Messenheimer wrote a great paper for Rio Grande Foundation, which we then stole, and then he changed up the numbers to make it fit Hawaii. But it was on the productivity of education. I don't know if any of you have read it, but just talking about, I mean, he makes a really good point. What are the two fields, what are the two areas of our economy where technology and innovation make prices go up instead of down? Anybody?
Healthcare.
Healthcare and education, right? We could be doing virtual learning, we could be doing all these things in education. It should cost half of what it cost a few years ago. Oh, I love you. If they kick me out of Hawaii like they want to, maybe I'll come here. And healthcare too, right? We have the best healthcare system in the world, yet the prices keep going up. Well, what do those two things have in common? They're primarily paid for by the government, right? It's not consumers who are price sensitive who are paying for these things out of their pockets. It's being indirectly paid for by them, but through the government. So that was a really great paper. I suggest you check it out that Dr. Messenheimer put together. Another big thing that Rio Grande Foundation and I say Rio Grande because I'm from Texas. I guess you say Rio Grande. I hope that's okay. Is healthcare. And you guys have been working on healthcare, just like many of the states, trying to stop this takeover at the federal level. Many of you may not realize that Hawaii. Is anyone familiar with what our friend Mitt Romney did in Massachusetts? I use friend kind of quotes. He started universal health care in Massachusetts. A Republican who ran for president a couple years later started universal health care in Massachusetts. Most people think that was the first statewide universal health care in the country. It wasn't. Hawaii was back in the 70s. We still are. Employers, for every employee who's working more than 25 hours a week in Hawaii, you must provide health insurance. And, excuse me. Should have brought my water over here. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So that's been an issue that we've been writing. You know, the New York Times will try to use Hawaii as a great example of how that's worked, and yet it hasn't. Our uninsured rate is higher than states that don't have mandates like that. Another one is eminent domain. You guys should give yourselves a round of applause because the Rio Grande Foundation helped implement one of the best eminent domain protection laws in the country 3 years ago. So that is awesome. You guys, thank you so much for your support, and I hope that we can do something like that in Hawaii. Something that's related to that, though, that I should let you all know about as a warning, we have a big Native Hawaiian sovereignty movement in Hawaii, and there's currently a bill that has passed the U.S. House of Representatives twice before, not this session, but it's the Akaka bill. And it would create a Native Hawaiian governing entity that would then have negotiating rights with the state and federal government. The counties are left out of it. But this would, unlike Indian reservations here and in other states, that are mostly contiguous pieces of land. The land that would be up for negotiation if this bill passes is 38% of the state of Hawaii, and it is sprinkled throughout the state. It's Pearl Harbor, it's the airport. It's very valuable pieces of federal and state lands. And if this bill passes, we don't know what will happen to us as a state. It goes further than Indian reservations and the privileges that it gives to the Native Hawaiians. And if this passes, it can set really dangerous precedent for all of you in a state that has as many Native Americans here as New Mexico. So just keep that on your radar, if you don't mind. And then finally, and this is probably the most exciting policy area for me, is this whole transparency and accountability in government initiative. Is everybody familiar with what Jim Scarantino did for you guys last week? He was the first, he's the reporter for the Rio Grande Foundation. He was the first reporter in the country to break the story on the Phantom Districts, getting stimulus money. And that's just so exciting to me. And I think, you know, for so long, think tanks like us have been putting out these academic white papers and hoping people read them, and maybe some of the thoughtful legislators do, but nobody else really does. And so I think just really putting out these stories that make these things tangible to people and make them, frankly, a little distrustful of government, I think is really one of the most valuable roles that we as think tanks can provide. So just in closing, I had dinner last night with Tom Dybel and his daughter, Kara, and I had met Tom at Atlas at the same time that I met Jean, and got to meet Kara for the first time, but Tom asked what our role is as think tanks. And I think that varies. I think in a state like Texas, that is friendly to business and that is respectful of individuals and of property rights. I think it is the right place for a think tank to put out policy recommendations. And because they are trusted by legislators and they are supported by public opinion, and so it makes sense for them to be the ones generating the ideas and really looked to by politicians because they're in that position. But then I think in Hawaii, where you have 90% of the legislature who doesn't agree with our principles, really more than that, and you have this old plantation mentality that's now a big union mentality, and New Mexico probably falls somewhere in the middle of those two states, probably closer to Hawaii. I think that we still have a lot of barriers to break down before we can really be looked to by legislators as the policy recommenders. And so I think that this is exactly the right direction for us to be going, for Rio Grande to be doing the investigative journalism, the government transparency, and I just think that's so important. And so I'm just gonna, Jane didn't ask me to do this, but I'm going to plead with you guys, first of all, thank you so much for supporting Rio Grande. I know that you wouldn't be here if you weren't supporters of the foundation, but then just ask you to dig deeper and just give as much as you can of your time and your resources to this organization. Because like I said, I've known Jean and Paul now for a long time, and I completely appreciate what they're doing. I respect them, and you know, we are blessed to have these jobs that we do and get to do what we do, but we certainly need people like you to enable us to do it. And if you know anyone in Hawaii that you can send my direction, that would be good too. Donors, not men. Never mind. I just remembered what she was saying earlier. So I am going to end with a couple, and feel free to get up and walk around or whatever while I'm doing this. I'll end with a couple of Christmas pieces. I'm in Hawaii, there are hundreds of thousands of members of our military stationed. And it seems like every other week I'm sending off another member of my church to Afghanistan or Iraq or someplace like that. And so this is kind of a modern, kind of bluesy version of this song, but I think you'll still recognize it. And I wanted to play it in honor of our troops who can't be home for Christmas.
thought it was going to be odd to do that after playing music, but I'm going to have her do
I'll
that.
save this one then.
Yeah. I'm going to let you do some Q&A with Jamie. You can see why she's become such a fabulous friend of mine and is truly a role model. She calls me Mom, which I think is so cute. And I actually have a daughter that's older than her, so I could be her mom. At least she would call me Grandma. But when we were in Virginia, this group of think tank leaders were, the youngest was, I believe, 18, and the oldest was me. And the span in between was about 22 to 32, and then there were the two of us on the opposite ends. And they just included me as if I was 30 or 25, and it was a wonderful experience for them to, you know, bring me into the group. But what I wanted you to see is what Jamie was talking about is the people who are leading think tanks, not only in the United States but around the world, come from every walk of life. I was sitting next to a PhD of physics who was expecting his first child and had been married just for a few years, who was also a rock star in his country. This is true, and he is the leader of their think tank. The picture that he has on his website is, you know, of him in a sleeveless shirt and, you know, rocking out. So there are people like Jamie who are, you know, former beauty queens. There are rock stars. There are young men who, from Kyrgyzstan, who are 18 and literally leading the charge over there, and you know what's going on in those Istan countries. I mean, it's an amazing group of people. And here in the United States, the leaders are exactly like that. The Paul Gessings, the Jamie Stories, who are running these organizations, are phenomenal human beings. So I'm going to let her do Q&A, but before she does, actually, I'm going to bring Tom Dybel up for a moment. And Tom is going to come up. He has asked me to just take a minute, and I'm going to let him do that because it's following on a comment that Jamie just made, which I'm going to hire her, actually, if she's going to come to all of our events and ask you to dig deeper. I'll hire her and she can come back. But I'm going to turn the mic over to Tom for just a minute.
Well, thank you, Jean. I had the opportunity to go to dinner with Jamie and Jean last night, and I've known them for several months now. And I asked them, what could I do here tonight? And they said, well, you can be very visible by giving a donation to the O'Donnell Foundation. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, Paul is not here tonight, and you know why, he's taking a course. He is doing what I would call lifetime learning. As a father of 5 kids, I know what he's getting into, and I just appreciate what that Krista is going to soon bestow upon him the title of Dad. And as Atlas Dad, my official title, I appreciate what he's going through. So I wish them all the best. But I do have a check. My annual contribution to the 9 Club. I'm paying it 1 installment. And I also want to thank Jean for all the work she's done in all these events, and I've enjoyed the opportunities to actually meet her at some Atlas events in the past. Thank you. And also, Jamie, I want to make your trip worthwhile. I have been a past contributor to the Grassroot Institute. I mean, the Grassroot Institute in Hawaii. I've been promoting a new name for you there.
There's more truth to that.
Okay, I can imagine. And actually, in the spirit of full disclosure, this is actually a bribe.
All right.
To encourage Jamie to join the Atlas network of intellectual entrepreneurs to help spread liberty throughout the world. And actually, it's not a bribe. It's really an opportunity for her to buy some seeds of freedom so that she can go and meet people like Natasha Sirac, the head of Adriatic Institute in Croatia, who has been an enemy of the state in the last year. Her efforts to uncover corruption in her country led to the resignation of their president in July. We talked about the young men from Azerbaijan at the Free Minds Institute, I think is the name of it, who are in prison for speaking out on issues. We talk about issues of property rights. And I'll just brag on my daughter who worked for Atlas for 8 years. Just met Hernando de Soto, who is a world leader in establishing property rights for poor people so that they own the land they've been living on so they can use that to get collateral for loans and to grow and develop their businesses. This is what this work is involved in, working on personal responsibility, rule of law, independent judiciary, all these issues that you'll identify. There's a worldwide network to it, and I'm really inviting Jamie to become part of that.
Thank you. So if I go to dinner with all of you and just say, "I'll bring a check," will it work?
You don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah, that's right. I'll be there tomorrow. Thanks, Tom. Before I turn this over to Jamie, because I want her to close this with music, I do want to encourage you to dig deeper. The Rio Grande Foundation just ran a $10,000 in 10 days campaign, and we raised half of that, which, since it's the first one we ever did, I was actually quite pleased with. But I would love to see another 5,000 come in. We're also sending out our end of year letter, and we hope that you will be able to respond. We know that everybody is hurting, and we know that things have changed from 2 years ago. We appreciate that, but the reason those things have changed are reasons that we're fighting against. So please remember that. And I have to say that as other charities are hurting, and I don't know if Jamie's experiencing this as well, I imagine she is, but as other charities are hurting in this economic downturn, I wouldn't say that we're thriving, but we are certainly feeling the concern of the public as donations come in from people we've never heard from before saying thank you for what you're doing to help with transparency and to help the economy. So we appreciate every dime you've given us. We appreciate every dime you will give us. And I do want you to know, if you know Paul Gessing, he counts every dollar. So it's very important that I mention to you tonight that we had an anonymous donor come in and fund this event for us. The Rio Grande Foundation did not buy an entire cow. Someone else actually donated the money and said, and I had to ask, I said, now is this a general donation? Because we had just been talking about the event. And his comment was, no, this is specifically for your event. I want this event to be very nice. So many thanks to this person who has asked to remain anonymous. He's not here tonight, so nobody has to look around and wonder who it is. We really appreciate it. Now, I'm going to turn the time over to Jamie with one comment, and that is she mentioned Harry Messenheimer. And I saw an email that he sent to Jamie, and he said, what a great idea to celebrate liberty through music. Maybe we will find the soul of classical liberalism in music. Because he said we've lost it. We have all the basics, we have all the dry stuff, but the soul of classical liberalism is still trying to kind of revive. And so maybe Jamie started that tonight, and some of us in ways that we haven't felt before. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jamie, and we're going to end with Jamie. I'm going to thank you right now for coming. We have a lot of food, so when you leave, please come over. We're going to have doggy bags. Truly, honestly, we're sending it home if you want it. We really appreciate your support. The Rio Grande Foundation would not be here. I wouldn't have a job. Paul wouldn't have a job if it wasn't for you. So thanks so much.
You're selling the leftover food, right?
Oh, yeah. Jamie will be off.
I'll take a few questions. I will play one more short, like 2-minute piece, but yes, sir, Rex?
Jamie, I'm just curious. You are in Hawaii now. Could you say anything about that female Republican governor that you have that I think most of us saw for the first time during the last Republican convention when she introduced, I don't know, it was Sarah Palin or something. And I sat there thinking, Jesus, why did McCain pick this woman? She was real impressive.
She is a fairly strong fiscal conservative. She's not a strong social conservative, which is of no consequence to the Grassroots Institute. But she seems to be a stronger fiscal conservative now that we have a shortfall than she was before. She signed the 0.5% sales tax increase to pay for our rail back when we didn't have a shortfall. I don't know if she would do that now or not. But so she's probably somewhere around the same level of McCain, I would say. But yeah, maybe not as conservative as Sarah Palin.
I must tell you that as a math nerd, you are already my hero.
Oh.
But I'm guessing from your comments that you are not considered Kama'aina. So I would like to know if you speak Dakine with a Texas accent.
Did you guys get that?
No.
Okay, Kama'aina means local in Hawaii, and Dakine is one of these. Pidgin English is kind of the slang English in Hawaii, and Dakine is it's like a filler word almost. It means a lot of different things. But Yeah, you know, I can hide my Texas accent really well, and I'm not sure if I am now or not.
Oh, no, you did great.
There's some Southerners, but in Hawaii I can hide it pretty well. But I can't speak Pidgin. They laugh when I try to do that.
Do you have any funny stories about birth certificates?
Birth certificate, I know! If I can't find it in Hawaii, I mean, no. We frequently get emails on that, and if I had we're searching for an investigative reporter, by the way. I can't tell you how difficult it is to find a good one. Even with so many being out of work, it is really hard. We've been looking for a year and haven't found a good fit. So you guys are really blessed to have a great one here. But no, if we had one, I'd probably at least let him spend a week or two on that. Anybody else? Oh, okay.
Afterwards, I think your House Majority Leader is a little more conservative than maybe Laronda's Trump.
Oh, okay. All right. Sounds good. And I will stick around afterwards in case you have any other questions. So I'll play one more piece. This is commonly called Carol of the Bells. Ukrainian bell carol is the formal word, I guess. And it was originally written without music or without words. There were English words added in the 20th century. But here's a very quick arrangement of Carol of the Bells.